A French private jet slicing through African skies, 17 crates sealed tight, glinting with secrets worth billions. No flight plan, no clearance, no consent. It was supposed to be a silent flight, a routine shadow in the air. But this time, the soil spoke, and Ibrahim Traoré was listening. As the Falcon 7X prepared for a covert descent over Burkina Faso, the radar lit up, and so did a young captain's intuition, trained not in bureaucracy, but in battle. Within hours, the flight that had left Paris, cloaked in secrecy, was surrounded on a military tarmac under the Sahelian moon. What they found inside cracked open more than crates. They cracked open a truth that had long traveled unspoken. This is not just a tale of smuggled diamonds. It is a reckoning, a confrontation decades in the making. One jet, one leader, one moment that could redraw the lines of power between Africa and the West. Do not look away. What comes next may change how we read the map. Subscribe and keep watching. What was hidden in those crates? And why did Paris tremble when they were opened? The sun was sinking behind the Sahel horizon when a quiet alarm pulsed through the radar center of Ouagadougou. The operator, young, focused, sweat beading at his temples, stared at the screen. A single dot blinked where no dot should be. A Falcon jet, no flight plan, entering from the north, he announced. His voice was calm, but in military command, calm is the echo of concern. The officer in charge stepped forward. His eyes followed the dot, too fast, too low, too silent. Contact it, he ordered, and alert President Traoré immediately. At 35 years old, Captain Ibrahim Traoré had already learned what silence in the sky can mean. His years in the military had sharpened not just his senses, but his suspicion. In a land rich in gold and earth, nothing unscheduled ever flew for goodwill. What did the diplomatic permits say? He asked his security advisor without rising from his desk. They're incomplete, Excellence. A commercial mission is stated, but no declared cargo. Stamps seem official, but no ministry confirms them. Traoré's face hardened. Send the drones. I want eyes in the sky before it lands anywhere. Within minutes, 2 unmanned aircrafts recently acquired from non-Western partners rose into the air like eagles sent to test the wind. They locked on, silent and discreet, tailing the jet at a distance just safe enough to remain unseen. The images came back clear. Falcon 7X, sleek, worth over 50 million euros. Its markings, vague, not linked to any known airline. But what caught the eye wasn't the polish of the fuselage. It was the heat signature in the cargo hold. Excellence, whispered the operations chief, passing Traoré a tablet. Dense objects, heavy, likely metallic, and clustered. Traoré didn't flinch. Redirect it to the military airbase. If it resists, our fighters will escort. Prepare the tarmac, secure the perimeter, and alert Mali and Niger. They need to know. In the cockpit of the jet, tension thickened. The pilot, French, mid-50s, seasoned in covert skies, scanned the radio message. They know, he muttered to his co-pilot. Paris will not like this. In the cabin behind him, 3 suited men sat in grim silence. One picked up a satellite phone and dialed. We have a problem, he said flatly. Traoré is intercepting. Back at the Ouagadougou airbase, armored vehicles rolled into position. Soldiers fanned out in near silence. The order was simple: land or be forced. No ambiguity, no negotiation. By 2317, the Falcon began its descent. Powerful military lights lit the runway like a theater stage. The engines whispered down. The wheels kissed the tarmac. And the trap closed. A dozen armored vehicles encircled the jet. Soldiers raised weapons. Their shadows danced like silent warnings on the white body of the plane. Nothing moves until I give the order, barked Colonel Ousmane Zungrana, commander of special operations and Traoré's most trusted blade. Inside the jet, stillness. No movement, no signals. At Traoré's command center, the president stood watching, unblinking. No rank, no medals, just uniform, just resolve. He picked up the intercom. They will exit one by one. Hands visible. Film everything. The door opened. An elegant stare unfolded. First came the pilot, eyes squinting under the floodlights. Then the co-pilot. Then the 3 passengers suited, pale, stone-faced. "I formally protest this treatment," one declared in accented French. "I am a commercial attaché. We possess diplomatic authorizations." Zungrana did not reply. His eyes remained on the plane. His hand signaled the team, "Begin the search." They moved with precision, military, methodical. Every inch was scanned. Then, in the rear cargo hold, they found them. 10 metal crates. Identical, sealed, heavily secured, omitted from all flight manifests. Zungrana radioed in. "Excellence. Undeclared containers confirmed. Do we proceed?" Traoré's voice came through. "Bring them to the secure hangar. I will be present." Film everything. The jet's passengers were split into 5 rooms, interrogated separately. The pilot's voice wavered. "I only fly where they tell me." The plan was legal. "Then why did you have just enough fuel to land here?" his interrogator asked. The commercial attaché was stone silent. His companions, less so. They contradicted each other, claimed trade, then mining, then diplomatic transit. Meanwhile, in the hangar, the crates were aligned under hard neon lights. Traoré entered with a geologist, a security team, and a camera crew. Opened the first. The lock was intricate, built for secrecy, but secrets don't last when sovereignty wakes. The lid was lifted. A hush fell. Inside, raw diamonds, hundreds, nestled in black foam, uncut, untaxed, unclaimed. The geologist leaned in, gloves on, eyes sharp. "These are type 2A, exceptional clarity, most likely from eastern deposits, Burkina soil." Traoré stared into the box. No emotion, just silence. Then, "Open the rest." One by one they opened. Diamonds, contracts, permits, fraud, forgery. But it was not just the weight of stones they discovered. It was the weight of a system. What happens when a continent finds its stolen voice buried in its own soil? Under the cold white lights of the hangar, the 10 crates stood like silent witnesses, unchanged, but charged with new weight. The air inside was tense, metallic, expectant. Soldiers flanked each side. Cameras rolled. A nation watched. President Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward. No podium, no speech, just presence. Beside him stood a team of experts, mineralogists, explosive specialists, legal analysts. One by one, they examined the locking systems. Precision work. High-grade encryption, not the kind used for commercial cargo, the kind used to hide what must never be found. Traoré gave the nod. Begin. The first crate clicked open. The lid lifted. What emerged under the lights could not lie. Hundreds of uncut diamonds arranged with surgical care in velvet-lined trays. Clear, cold, pure. The kind sought by royals and billionaires. Stones that should have carried the hopes of a nation, but were instead packed for silent theft. The mineralogist gasped. "These are elite-grade Type 2A, among the purest on Earth. These didn't come from abroad. They are Burkina Eastern mines, without doubt." The silence that followed was not confusion. It was calculation. In crate after crate, the pattern held. Diamonds by the hundreds. But the final container held more than stone. It held proof. Forged export licenses, stamped by familiar ministries, yet never filed. Falsified invoices designed to undervalue cargo. Contracts linking shadowy firms to former officials. Names known in diplomatic circles. Names that whispered of corridors long considered untouchable. One document bore a seal from a European ministry. Another, a signature traced to a boardroom in Paris. Colonel Zungrana stepped forward. "Excellence," he said, his voice low but steady. "The total estimated value exceeds 3 billion euros. And the paper trail suggests this is not a one-time event. It's an established route." Traoré's face remained unreadable, but his silence was its own kind of thunder. "Notify our allies in Mali and Niger, and prepare a press conference. International. Known. In the makeshift interrogation rooms, the occupants of the jet were feeling the shift. The pilot, once firm, now sweated profusely. "I don't know what was in the hold. They told me to keep radio silence." The attaché stayed silent, but his eyes betrayed urgency. And his colleagues, they crumbled. Their stories diverged. Business trip, humanitarian outreach, diplomatic exchange. None could explain the diamonds or the forged papers. Outside, rumors surged through Ouagadougou like a desert wind. The military movement, the sealed hangar, the French registered jet. Social media was ablaze. Whispers of diamonds, of betrayal, of a president who did not blink. And inside that hangar, Traoré stood before the crates not as a mere head of state, but as a sentinel. These stones, he thought, had been pulled from the earth by calloused hands, washed in rivers that fed villages, guarded by elders who prayed for peace. Yet they had been caged in steel boxes, stolen in silence, destined to light up foreign showcases, while the children of Burkina Faso walked barefoot to schools without roofs. "This," he murmured, turning to his team, "is not commerce. It is theft. It is betrayal. And it would not be hidden." By dawn, images from inside the hangar were transmitted to a secure line. Allies were watching. Journalists were preparing. A moment was crystallizing, like the very stones that had caused it. But this was more than a scandal. It was a mirror, a reflection of a system long cloaked in euphemism and paperwork. France, once untouchable in its African dealings, was now exposed. Paris had not planned for this. It had not prepared for a leader who would expose the underbelly instead of bargaining behind curtains. A leader who refused the old game, and as word spread, from Bamako to Kinshasa, the continent stirred. They had seen coups. They had seen protests. But this was something else. This was a young man standing without fear, calling the theft by its name. What will the world say when the diamonds speak louder than diplomacy? By sunrise, the story was no longer a secret. It was a storm. Across Ouagadougou, whispers had turned into open conversations. Civil servants spoke in hushed tones. Students gathered in dormitories, scrolling endlessly. On the streets, vendors paused their sales to check updates on shared smartphones. The images were unmistakable: metal crates, glittering stones, and a president standing still beneath hangar lights. News outlets scrambled for coverage. By mid-morning, the footage had reached the continent's living rooms. Television anchors paused between segments, visibly shaken by what they reported. "Un jet français, des diamants, une trahison silencieuse," one headline read. The betrayal was not just of minerals, it was of memory, of dignity, of sovereignty. At the heart of it stood a name already known, but now elevated to something greater: Ibrahim Traoré. Not just a president, a symbol, the embodiment of refusal. The echo of every village elder who had watched wealth depart in trucks and planes, never to return. In schools, teachers paused lessons to explain the unfolding events. "This is not a lesson in history," one said to her class. "This is history." Across the Sahel, a ripple became a wave. In Mali and Niger, coordinated statements of support were released within hours. Leaders affirmed the right of nations to control their airspace, their resources, their narrative. The flags of a new alliance were quietly raised, green, gold, and red flying together with renewed meaning. But beyond governments, the people moved faster. In Bamako, graffiti appeared overnight. "Stop the bleeding. Africa rises." In Niamey, crowds gathered outside the French embassy, calm, determined, eyes filled with something that looked like awakening. On Twitter, a single phrase trended continent-wide: "Not again. Not this time." Hashtags in Swahili, Hausa, Wolof, and Arabic echoed the same sentiment. This was no longer a Burkina issue, it was continental. Within the presidential palace, the atmosphere had shifted from reaction to resolve. Ministers arrived early, folders in hand. The Ministry of Justice reviewed mining licenses. The Ministry of Interior began internal audits. The military stood ready, calm but alert. "We must not only react," said one advisor. "We must restructure." Traoré listened carefully, then gave a single directive: transparency. Everywhere, every sector. In university halls, students organized forums. What began as a breaking news headline had become a national teach-in. Pan-African thinkers quoted Frantz Fanon and Thomas Sankara, drawing lines from history to the moment now televised. "This is what a turning point looks like," one student declared, "not with bullets, but with truth." Outside the capital, in mining towns and border villages, the effect was even more visceral. Fathers who had once worked security at extraction sites spoke of shipments that never returned. Mothers recalled the strangers who offered medicine and left with stone. And children, watching the broadcasts beside their parents, began to ask new questions. Why do we dig and stay poor? Who do the diamonds belong to if not us? The response was not chaos. It was clarity. Yet the clarity brought challenge. Foreign companies quietly suspended operations. Contracts were frozen. Some embassies issued vague advisories. But the Burkina government did not blink. The presidency released a simple statement: "The ground beneath our feet is not for sale. We protect what is ours." Meanwhile, leaders across Africa watched and weighed. Some remained silent. Others sent quiet signals of solidarity. In Accra, the Ministry of Natural Resources initiated a sudden internal review. In Kinshasa, lawmakers debated transparency laws. In Windhoek, a youth delegation submitted a petition to nationalize critical exports. And in Paris, a different mood prevailed, a mixture of disbelief and fury. How had a single night in Ouagadougou become a continental earthquake? Because in that moment, power was being redefined not by arms but by assertion, and the assertion was spreading. The fear in foreign capitals was not merely about diamonds. It was about precedent. If Burkina Faso could say no and back it with proof, people, and policy, who would follow? The old model of partnership built on silence was cracking. At the center of it all, Traoré remained quiet. No triumphant speech. No political theater, just quiet preparation. For him, the diamonds were not the climax. They were the evidence, the proof of something long suspected. He knew what came next would not be easy. Economic pressure, political distortion, even personal threats. But he also knew something else. He was not alone. Can Africa stay united long enough to finish what it has finally started? While the sun rose over Ouagadougou, it was setting on the confidence of Western diplomacy. In Paris, the early morning calm of ministries and boardrooms shattered with a single transmission. Burkina Faso had seized a French jet carrying undeclared diamonds, forged documents, and diplomatic seals. Within the hour, the Élysée Palace was in emergency mode. President Macron's advisors, visibly shaken, attempted to assemble a damage control narrative. A private commercial error, they proposed. No state involvement. A rogue operation. But the footage said otherwise. And worse, it had gone global. French media split along familiar lines. Some called for restraint, others for retribution. But across international newsrooms, from CNN to Al Jazeera, one headline reigned: Burkina Faso exposes diamond scandal with French links. The images of the crates, the documents, the press conference set for noon. It was no longer a rumor. It was evidence, and it was on screen. At the Quai d'Orsay, diplomats scrambled to prepare a communiqué. France denies any state involvement, it read. The government will cooperate fully with Burkina authorities. But few believed it. Reporters pressed for answers. Why were diplomatic stamps used? How many previous flights passed unnoticed? The spokesperson danced around details, and in doing so, confirmed suspicions. Meanwhile, the European Union convened a closed session. Inside the parliament, murmurs became alarms. If these claims are true, said a German MP, then our entire policy towards Africa needs reevaluation. A Swedish delegate asked what others feared to say. Has France undermined us all? No official answers came, only unease. Markets reacted faster than ministers. In Paris, the stock value of companies with mining operations in Africa plummeted. Billions evaporated in hours. Panic followed. Hedge funds offloaded assets. Investors fled. The phrase resource risk began to circulate with new gravity. In Brussels, questions deepened. Should European funds be suspended? Was this an isolated breach or systemic? The tone shifted from defense to distance. "Let France answer," one commissioner remarked. "We will not carry the scandal on our shoulders." But perhaps the most unexpected resistance came at the United Nations. France had hoped for a resolution condemning Burkina Faso's actions as disruptive to international norms. Instead, they found reluctance. China, Russia, Brazil, and even India expressed hesitation. "What we are witnessing," said the Chinese delegate with a slight smile, "is an assertion of sovereignty, not a breach, a precedent." Even within the United States, reactions were measured. "If the facts are accurate," said one White House aide off record, "this changes the way we engage across Francophone Africa." It wasn't a condemnation. It was an adjustment. But not all reactions were diplomatic. Late that evening, reports emerged of a suspicious incident near the Burkina presidential convoy, an apparent brake failure on an escort vehicle, dismissed publicly as mechanical. Privately, it sparked internal alarms. One official, speaking on condition of anonymity, used a phrase no one had yet dared to say aloud. Could this be the first signal in a tentative d'assassinat? Ibrahim Traoré? The implication was chilling. The stakes had grown. What began as a jet interception was now a confrontation between systems, between silence and exposure, between control and dignity. Is this a Suez moment? Has the old order just been breached permanently? By the time dusk returned to Ouagadougou, the world had changed. But revolutions do not settle with headlines. They settle or fracture in the days that follow. And now Burkina Faso stood at the edge of that line. The international press continued to swirl with fury, admiration, and disbelief. Yet within the country, the message was clear. This was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a reckoning. President Traoré convened his cabinet behind closed doors. No celebrations. Just maps, contracts, and timetables. "We will not match their speed," he said. "We will outlast their intent." Emergency legislation was drafted to nationalize all diamond operations within state borders. Licenses were revoked. Foreign firms were summoned to renegotiate, this time under public oversight, with community stakes and sovereign terms. In Bamako and Niamey, similar decisions were unfolding. The alliance of Sahel states moved as one. They didn't speak in declarations, but in synchronized policy. Joint resource registries, shared intelligence, coordinated audits. For decades, collaboration had been a dream. Now, under pressure, it was function. Students across Africa transformed their rage into proposals. In Dakar, they held forums on fair trade. In Kinshasa, debates on transparency laws. In Accra, street murals appeared. Traoré painted not as a politician, but as a farmer planting a diamond into the soil, labeled "for the people." The symbolism was powerful. The message clearer still: sovereignty must begin from the ground up. But not all paths ahead were paved. France, reeling from the diplomatic backlash and economic hemorrhage, began to hint at financial retaliation. Development assistance was paused. Trade permits were under review. Analysts on European television warned of an African spring that might cost billions in contracts. But the pressure did not have the effect intended. Rather than folding, Burkina Faso leaned in. The diamonds seized were not sold. They were displayed openly in the National Museum, not as trophies, but as testimony. School groups visited them with guided tours explaining what each stone represented. Not wealth, but warning. Not shame, but awakening. Traoré's government launched a sovereign resources fund to be managed jointly with civil society and monitored by international auditors of the people's choosing, not France's. It was a signal. The future would be owned, not outsourced. The road ahead was not smooth. Sabotage remained a risk. Political pressure would mount. Some allies would be tempted to return to old comfort. But the frame had shifted. Burkina Faso had shown that silence was no longer the only option. That dignity, when backed by discipline and clarity, could change the terrain. Across Africa, something deeper had taken root. Not just outrage, but order. Not just protest, but policy. The storm had passed. The rebuilding had begun. What legacy will this spark in Burkina Faso and beyond the borderlines drawn in old ink? What began with an unannounced jet cutting across African skies ended in a moment of continental clarity. The interception of 17 crates was not merely about diamonds. It was about the invisible hands that have moved through African airspace, boardrooms, and ministries for decades. Hands that operated in silence. Until one voice broke through. Ibrahim Traoré did not just land a plane. He grounded a paradigm. In a single act, he lifted the curtain on how sovereignty has long been negotiated behind doors never meant for Africans to enter. His message was not cloaked in ideology, it was precise, provable, and powerful. The world could no longer pretend not to see. The exposure of forged documents, covert flights, and elite complicity forced every capital, African and European, to reckon with itself. And when the question arose whether Burkina Faso would survive the retaliation, it was not fear that spread. It was fire. A fire of dignity, of refusal, of redefinition. Even whispers of a tentative d'assassinat Ibrahim Traoré could not dampen the moment. On the contrary, they sharpened the stakes. Because when truth walks free, power often grows desperate. But Traoré stood firm, flanked not just by soldiers, but by students, farmers, mothers, and workers who recognized that this was not just his fight. It was theirs. In the days that followed, laws changed. Symbols shifted. Diamonds once hoarded in vaults became exhibits in museums. Contracts once signed in secret were redrafted in daylight. And the leader who once stood alone now stood at the head of a growing wave. Ibrahim Traoré had become more than a name. He had become a mirror reflecting what African leadership could mean when it chose truth over convenience, courage over silence. But this moment is not his alone. It belongs to every voice that dared to ask, who owns the land? Who speaks for the soil? Who decides the value of what lies beneath our feet? Africa is not rising. Africa has always risen. What we witness now is not a beginning, but a return. These are not just diamonds. These are declarations. If this story resonates with your sense of justice and hope, share it. Speak on it. Subscribe to stand with those who choose truth, no matter the cost.